Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. You know, if John Hancock were alive today, he'd say, the Greeks are gone, people. And I say, we're all Greek now. Yeah, we're all goners. Let's talk to Stacy Herbert and find out more. Stacy?
Max, yes. Well, you know, austerity has been the biggest catchword of this whole entire financial crisis. We've seen Greece on the verge of bankruptcy and a huge imposition of austerity. We see it everywhere, and of course George Osborne is about to announce in July some new round of austerity. But I saw a piece talking about austerity in relation to the American Revolution, and the headline reads, 1776, the revolt against austerity. In 1763, in England, they had 122 million pounds in debt. That was 150% of GDP. Debt to GDP. Right now, by the way, it's 90.6% debt to GDP, and they're imposing austerity. But there was a huge debate going on at the time here in England. Do we impose austerity on the colonies, where a lot of their wealth was coming from, or because here back home, everybody was sick of high taxes? So they did. They imposed a proclamation line of 1763. They were subsidizing immigration to the U.S., and they stopped at the colonies. They also introduced the 1763 Hovering Act, the Currency Act of 1764, so that the U.S. couldn't print their own currency and escape the austerity. They also, for example, forbade trade with anybody but England, so they couldn't trade any longer with the colonial Spain, for example.
So I guess the point being that austerity led to the American Revolution. Austerity from England that suddenly, after years and years of promoting the colonies by giving them some tax breaks and by encouraging the growth of the population, they suddenly decided to impose austerity.
Yes.
And the colonists at that time decided that, well, you know, maybe it's time for us to stage an Declaration of Independence.
A lot of this actually was in the Declaration of Independence, and the article notes that the wealthy Boston merchant and prominent signatory of the Declaration, John Hancock, thought the new policies were, quote, very cruel and would soon make the Americans a gone people. Contemporaries believed that British manufacturing exports to America had declined by 3/4. Most Americans were certain that the multifaceted economic contraction of 1764 to 1769 had everything to do with Prime Minister Grenville's austerity, which the American founders described as, quote, a history of repeated injuries and usurpations.
You have two examples today of countries facing similar situations. You've got Greece, as you mentioned, that's being subjected to austerity from the Germans after allowing them to enjoy the benefits of being part of the euro. And when that happened, Greeks suddenly had a huge windfall, including the Olympics. But then the Germans decided, you know what, we're going to start imposing austerity, and their best course of action for Greece would be to declare independence. But we also see it in Scotland. Scotland has been subjected to austerity from Westminster. And they had a referendum, and they voted against independence. Then the SNP rose up in power because it was clear that the so-called deal made between Westminster and Scotland was not going to be honored. And now they're going to shoot for another referendum, another vote on independence. And it looks good that they will declare independence, and they will follow America as somebody who escaped the onerous, draconian debt schemes.
Of course, it was physical hot wars. Right now, we have the class war that Warren Buffett, one of the richest men, always talks about, that he's winning, their class is winning, the top 0.1%. And because we bailed out the banks, the debt in this country, for example, went from an average of 50% of debt to GDP for the past decades to now 91%. In Greece, it's 175%. But back then, again, there was, before the revolution, before the Declaration of Independence, and we see that a lot now, there's declarations of independences going on, and there's calls for revolution.
But there's additionally, aside from the austerity imposed by this wealth redistribution from the many to the plutocrats, there's also been a redistribution of rights and laws. So now we have, in the UK, rights are being taken away from people as well as their wealth. And the legal system is now two-tier, where if you have a certain amount of money, you're part of the plutocratic class. You have a separate legal system where a lot of stuff is okay to do, but is not okay. And we just saw it in the situation where Barclays Bank and other banks were caught criminal law breaking, and they were given a pat on the back. And for everyone else, of course, not in the plutocratic class, they would go to jail.
Well, of course, those closest to the king over here back in England, not in the colonies, were of course able to speak to him and say, yes, impose austerity on those people way far away, even though they're creating all the wealth. And the debates were raging. William Pitt on one side, the Grenville, who was the prime minister, on the other side. And on the side of the Americans, the patriots, was John Locke and also Adam Smith. But first they said that, what alternative strategy did the authors of the Declaration propose? Today we tend to regard the practice of using government spending to stimulate economic growth as an invention of John Maynard Keynes in the 1930s. But already in the 18th century, self-styled patriots, followers of William Pitt on both sides of the Atlantic, argued that what the British Empire needed if it was to recover from the fiscal crisis was not austerity, but an economic stimulus. In the midst of the crisis, one journalist wrote that Pitt and the patriots believed that the burgeoning debt could be reduced by increasing the national stock, or gross national product, whereas Prime Minister Grenville believed that 140 million of debt is to be paid by saving of pence and farthings.
Right, austerity has many names. You can call it discrimination. You can call it apartheid in South Africa. In other words, this idea of austerity in our modern era takes the form of what I call interest rate apartheid. And in America, they don't call it austerity, but if you try to get any money, they're going to charge you 20, 30, 40%. Here in this country, you try to borrow money from a payday lender, it's 2,000, 3,000% annualized rates of return. If you're part of the plutocrats, if you're part of the privileged class that's being handed money at 0% interest ad infinitum, no strings attached, your interest costs are zero. So it's austerity through interest rates, which is a point that the unions in this country don't understand. The left in this country doesn't understand. Labor politicians don't understand. They still think we live in the 19th century where it's about negotiating wages, and that era has long gone.
So the British Empire had subsidized immigration, and John Locke was saying we need more immigration to the colonies. Of course, right now what you see in the U.S. and here is a crackdown now on immigration, or chatter about like cracking down on immigration. Of course, there was 318,000 more immigrating into the UK last year than emigrating. And that's probably the only reason why the UK even had any marginal growth. But now they want to crack down on it for, you know, austerity reasons. But the other thing that was interesting that I had no idea about is looking back at the Declaration of Independence and all the writings of the actual founders of the United States of America, was that they were really against slavery. And the King George III, would not allow them to end it. I guess because a lot of the slave trade came through here and they were making money on the rentier of renting the slaves out. But many of the founders had also come to appreciate that a system of chattel slavery made no economic sense at all, since it would replace potential consumers with unfree laborers who could not purchase goods. From the 1730s on, an increasingly loud chorus of patriots that argued against slavery in general, and the slave trade in particular, for its immorality and its disastrous economic consequences. Slave societies, they argued, could not be a consumer society. And Adam Smith said in particular, the work done by free men comes cheaper in the end than those performed by slaves. But now, of course, we have all these debt slaves, and remember, a lot of the discussion going on right now is the economic conundrum of why, despite the fact that gasoline prices collapsed in the U.S., why has there been no more consumption?
Right. Why are the sales of Walmart and McDonald's going down? Because the people at Walmart are not living what they call it a living wage. But what the truth about it is they are being paid a slave wage. They're being paid a stipend from Walmart, and if they didn't get a subsidy from the federal government, the United States government, they would be exactly equivalent to a slave wage, and therefore there's nothing left over for them to buy stuff at Walmart. And Walmart is the biggest employer in America, second maybe only to the military. And Henry Ford figured this out many years ago when he gave everybody in the plant a raise so they could go out and buy a Ford car.
Yeah.
But the Walmart people are so conniving and so bankrupt intellectually and emotionally and spiritually, and they're such a rapacious force on the spirit of America that it's hard to even believe how the federal government allows these Benedict Arnolds at the Walmart family to even live in America.
Well, it's a debate that was going on for the past hundreds of years, and sometimes the winner, you know, America became a huge country and a successful economic powerhouse because they cut off from the austerers over here. Now, I want to do a quick headline and then go back to it, because there's a headline here: every single part of Los Angeles is unaffordable and $15 an hour. You know, Los Angeles just voted to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2020, but still, that's not enough money even today, let alone in 2020, to afford anywhere to live in Los Angeles across the entire huge city, of sprawling city. But going back to what Adam Smith said about the colonies at the time, he said, had the British government pursued measures to support the colonies rather than austerity policies that retarded their growth, Smith believed the American economy would have been so dynamic that in little more than a century, the seat of the empire would then naturally remove itself to its most economically dynamic region, North America. So the headquarters of the empire could right now be in America somewhere, but instead they chose to lose it.
Right, because Westminster opted for short-term gains over long-term value. And then they got really persnickety and nasty and rapacious when they realized that they made an egregious error.
Well, the same could be said as we look across Europe now, where the similar situations of debt to GDP in Greece, I said it's 175%. Spain is like Portugal is like 137%. Spain is lower at 94%. But you know, they're imposing huge austerity on their economic bloc, their empire, as it were, is going to disintegrate, and it could be bloody like the American Revolution.
Instead of, you know, for the American GDP to grow sufficiently to pay down their debt, which is now almost $20 trillion, they would encourage immigration and raise the minimum wage.
Yeah.
But because the Walmart family and Warren Buffett and the McDonald's Corporation and Coca-Cola is into, for the short-term pop of a stock option play, they're willing to flush the country down the toilet, and according to the founding fathers of America, we know what they say about that.
But even worse, like, forget America because they've got their own, you know, independence. They still have more independence than Greece. Greece is the story that we're looking at, and Greece is the sort of violence being imposed upon them, of the people there, the collapse of their economy, the ongoing crisis, the humanitarian crisis is something that you will see, like a declaration of independence, and you know, we don't know what's going to happen after that.
Well, I totally support Greece declaring their independence from the EU and the International Monetary Fund and the kleptocrats in Brussels. Of course I do. I'll be down in Athens soon to show you my support. I love you. We got to go.
Declare your independence, Greece.
This is the only way to go.